So in this section, we're going to be taking a look at how we can make various bricks, but then also improve the overall visual quality. We'll talk about how we can use a world position offset within the material to cause some movement within things. So you could use this for, you can see those waters bobbing up and down, or you could use it for something like simulating grass or tree leaves blowing in the wind, stuff like that. And then we will also take a look at how we can add some transparency cards and the two different types of transparency that Unreal has. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the generation of textures. We talked about this in the earlier video about how to make the different textures that we're using, but I just wanted to show you for this scene that I'm making, I have this, what I was calling like a just dirt kind of texture, and remember we laid this out to where this is the front, left, right, this is the top and the bottom, and this is the back of this. So I painted some a different brick where we've got some grass growing on the top and it kind of folds down, maybe it's got some flowers on there. This is what I painted for having the water texture. And in Photoshop there's the possibility to just go into this area and you can use pencil tool, which will give you just more of like a block to kind of paint with, and it's nice and hard edged versus the paintbrush, which is going to have soft edges to it. So that's how you can get this kind of blocky look for that. I'll talk a little bit later about the grass and the transparency and the use of alpha for this that you see down here, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that these textures were made. And so if I go back on over to Unreal and I take a look at the material that was created for this, this is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to make a master material and we're going to set up a bunch of different parameters for things. So the cool thing is we can set up one material that we consider a parent, and any material instance that we make of this, we will make it really easy for us as the artist to tune the values in there. So you can change things like color, we'll change things like with metallic values, specular, roughness, the amount of emissive that you might see within there. And then when we get to the water part, we will also look at how we can move this thing up and down within the shader and get that type of movement on there. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just minimize this real quick and then show you for making materials. I'm just gonna make a new folder and I'll call this material example like this. And I've already made a folder for textures and for meshes, and so we do have the cube within there. Now if I go to materials, this material example folder, what we can do to make a new material, we'll just right click and we'll just go to material, and I'll call this m underscore master material, and I'll call this example like that. Okay, go ahead and create that. So let's just go ahead and double click on this material to open it up, and then if we take a look at this area, I'm just going to push it over and I'm going to get to my textures, and what I'm going to do is drag in a different texture than what I was using before. So I'll just do this Minecraft Dirt version 2 and I'll drag this in here. Now we could just hook the RGB directly up to the base color and that would start giving us color information. The other thing I can do is go to the mesh, and we can actually take the actual mesh that we're going to be applying this material to, select it, and then you can hit this little it looks like a brick icon, and we can push this in here, and now we can actually see the material being applied to our actual object that we have within here. Okay. The next thing I want to do is start turning these things into parameters so we can change them in the material instance when we get to that part. So for a texture sample, just right click in there and say convert to parameter like this, and then you can call this something like base color like that, and then now whenever you go in the material instance you would see you might have this parameter name of base color, And if you wanted to put it in a group, right now there's no groups that exist, but I could call everything that I do to base color. I could do this like that and put a group for that, just like that. And then now I'll have this for base color. The other thing we can do is, that's pretty easy. We can right click on this metallic, say promote to variable. Now metallic, when I start off, is probably going to be a value of 0, which means it's not metallic, and if it's a value of 1, it is metallic. So I'll leave that. Specular, if we want to control that, promote to a parameter. Specular should be a default value of, I'll put that up to 1 to give it full specularity. Now you can see if we start to drag that down, we can start to limit the amount of specularity that's on the object. So that's why I'm going to leave this at 1. We can tune all this stuff later in the material instance. And as we start to grow these nodes, you might want to space this out a little bit and give some breathing room on here. So I'll right click on here and say promote to parameter for roughness. And roughness, if you've got a value of 0, it's going to be super shiny, like what you see here, almost like mirror-like. And if we put this to a value of 1, there's not going to be any specularity at all, because it is supposed to be a pure rough surface. Now if we put it on something like 0.6, then we've got a little bit of specularity that's falling on there. If we get even lower, like 0.25, you can see we get a nice amount of spec on there and reflection at the same time. So roughness is going to drive both the specularity amount and how much highlight falls on there, but then also how much reflectivity is going on the object as well. So I like to think of 0 as glass, and then if you give a value of 1 for roughness, then that's like a really matte finish wall that's got like the paint's really kind of absorbs all the light on there, and it doesn't really bounce off, so it's just really kind of almost dry looking, and there's no specularity on there at all. Okay, so for emissive color, we can right click and say promote to parameter, and that will give us this color node that you see here, and we could double click on that and we could make this let's say we make this like a red color, and you can see how we could drive emissive like that. I'll just put this at black and leave it just so we have that within there, and then that is going to give us the basis and the start of what we're going to make for this. So let's work on base color and see what we can do to alter this. So if you want to do any alterations like desaturate it and make it black and white, there is a saturation node. So if you just right click on there and start typing desaturation, you can get that, and we can plug in the RGB to the top node here. And again, with these nodes, we can right click and say promote to parameter, so it's going to give us this name of fraction, but I'd like to give it a little bit more description on there, and so we can call this desat underscore fraction, like this. And if you remember the group that we had set up for base color, if we want this to all show up in a similar area, we can call this base color right here for the group. And then now if we plug this into base color, you can see the parameter value was 0, so it's not going to do any desaturation. But if we put this at 1, you can see it's going to turn the image black and white. And then if we do 0.5, you can see we can get a little bit less saturation going on there. So I'll just put that at 0, and that'll give us something that we can reduce the amount of color information on there. The next thing I'm going to do is, what if we want to lighten our texture? We can use an add node, and so if you hold down A and click, you can get add, or you can right click and just type in add like this, and you can get an add node. And we'll pipe this into the A slot, and then we can right click and say promote to parameter. If we do that, this is going to give it a scalar value, so it's just going to be one value. So hotkeys for this: if you hold down 1 and click, you get one scalar value. If you hold on 2 and click, you get these 2 values. So that could be like U and V coordinates or something like that, right? And if you hold down 3 and click, you get three coordinates, and that could be X, Y, and Z, or it could be RGB. And if you hold down 4 and click, then you can get something like red, green, blue, and alpha. So that's the hotkeys for that. you know, you can type in constant, and you can do a constant vector 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the hotkeys that we just did for that within there. So if I want to lighten it, I could lighten it, but I could just make it, if it's a scalar value, it's just going to be basically black and white, a value that's going to raise it up or down. Now, if we want to actually tint it towards a color, then we can use red, green, and blue. So if we held down 3 and clicked, we're going to get this. But we can right click on that and we can say convert to parameter, and then we can call this, let's call it base color, and I'll do underscore lighten like this. And we can plug in the red, green, blue out from this node into the B slot like this. And if it's black, it's not going to add any light to it at all. So that's pretty good as a starting point. So I just want to put these controls in there, but I don't want it to actually affect the final output. I want to be able to tune it later, but you know, so we've got this going on. Now watch this. If we tint it towards red and then lift up, you can see how it's tinting that texture, and it's making it lighter, and it's tinting it towards whatever that color is that we're choosing for this on there. Okay, so I'm going to set that back to black. So that's how that's working. So that's going to lighten things. And if we want to darken things, we can use a multiply node. So if we hold down M and click, we can get a multiply node, or you can right click and type in mult, and you start to find that you got a multiply right there like that. So I'm going to pipe the result of all this, because this just keeps moving down the chain, and I'm going to plug in the result of that into A, and then again we'll make a convert to parameter. But actually I want to red, green, blue. We've already got a parameter here. So the other thing that we can do is copy this, and then we can paste it, but make sure we give it a different name, otherwise that can cause some issues. So base color, instead of lighten, I'll call this darken like this. Now on this, I will make it pure white, because if we multiply white over the top of something, then it won't have any effect because you're darkening it. So if you add pure white, you can't darken it, right? So I'm going to drag a marquee around this. I'm going to push these over just a little bit to get this away from here, and let's just see what this does. So if we start to push this towards black, it's going to darken the texture. But again, if we want to tint this while we multiply, we can do that as well. We can change the color. You can change it to whatever you want. It could be blues, could be purples, but that's going to give us a darkening effect. And so just to put the controls in there, I'm going to make this white, just like that. And then I feel like I've got everything that I want to build for base color to give some tuning ability for that. So the next thing I'm going to show you is we can drag a marquee around everything, and we can tap C to make a comment box for this, and we can call this base color controls. You can name it whatever you want, but then this makes it really nice to just grab this whole box, and you can move the thing around, and you can reposition it. So if I'm using middle mouse scroll wheel to zoom out, and now I can just place this up within through here like that. Okay. So the other thing that we can do is we could steal individual channels from this. So if I wanted to just grab the red channel from this texture, or the green channel, or the blue channel, let's take a look at textures real quick. Let's double click this, and I know we got a really small texture, but within here you got the ability to just view the individual channels. So if you wanted to steal the red channel and use that as a black and white mask, which we can look at, you can see what that looks like. And then here's just the green channel, and here's just the blue channel. So maybe one of those channels works out pretty good for you for being able to kind of steal that information and use it as a mask on things. So we've already got metallic, we've already got a specular value. So you know that if specular is set to 1, it's got full specularity on this object, right? Now if we did what I was talking about, where we plug in like the red channel into specular, that's going to act like a mask on there. And so there's going to be some areas that are going to have specularity, and then some areas that don't. So we could use the green channel and try that and see what we get for that. Okay, so the green area is showing up and having a whole lot more specularity, but then down here below where it's not as green, it's not as specular on there. And we could do the same thing for blue on here, like that. Or you could take RGB and you could pipe that out and you can push that whole thing into there and it'll change it into like a black and white value for things. Okay, so what you could potentially do for this is we could pipe out the red, green, blue, and we could turn this into a mask for things. And what we could do for that, let's take a look at, I guess, since we've already been talking about specularity, let's talk about multiplying this together with this. So if I tap M and then click, I can get specular, and then I can run the out of this. It doesn't matter if I plug it into slot A or B, either one. And if I multiply my specular value to this, then I have some kind of control over this whole thing. So now I've got this as a mask, and this might come in handy for you. You can right click on a node and say start previewing node, so we can take a look at how's this color map working together with this specular, and what are the values that it's driving for that. And it might make more sense if we just pipe in a red channel into there, so now you can see how that's going to be kind of working as a mask. And then for the specular, if I put that value down to 0, it should turn it to full black. If I do 0.2, you can see it's starting to raise that up. So that's basically allowing, like wherever it's white, it's going to allow specularity to fall within there. And again, we can do red, green, and blue, and we can push that within there. It just might be a little bit more difficult for you to visualize. Now we could copy the desaturation node and paste it, and if you wanted to see what that looked like, we don't have to have a parameter on there. If we know we're going to turn these into black and white maps, we can always leave that fraction on the desaturation. We could always leave that at 1, like that. So you can see how that's turning that into a black and white map. We can take the specular, and again, if I put this up to 1, we're going to get pretty high values. But if we do something like 0.5, this starts to get pretty dark within there. And then if we need to stop previewing this, we can right click and say stop previewing node. And now hopefully you get an understanding of maybe what's going on with that specular. Again, it's falling on the green, this green area here. It's not falling on the dark area quite as much. And yeah, so we could leave this together, and we could make another comment box. Just select over there, type C for that, and then we can call this specular controls. And need to spell correctly. There we go. And so we got specular controls, and we could do a very similar setup. Now that we've got one made, I can give a little bit more room on here, and what I can do is just take these two nodes and I can copy and I can paste them, and we'll take metallic and we'll push metallic down here like this. And anytime you want to run something, like let's say this is really far away, you can right click on the out of this and then connect it to, what do you want to connect it to? Let's connect it to metallic. We have an error in here because we don't have this hooked into there, so no big deal for that. So let's just do this, just like this in here. So now that we've got a metallic setup, so we have control over a black and white mask feeding into that. And let's just drag a marquee around here, tap C, and then call this metallic controls, like that. So I'll push this over here like this, and then let's do the same thing for roughness. So I can hit paste because I've already got that within there. I'll take the roughness, I'll drag it within here like that, plug that to roughness, and pipe the red, green, and blue out to that, right there like that. So let's call this roughness controls, like that. Okay, and we will do one more for emissive. Just paste that, and I'll put this within here, like this. And you can see how we're getting kind of far away from there, so we can right click in there and say connect to emissive color. And we'll just run the red, green, blue out from that to this here. And let's type in C. And there we go. Okay, so we got metallic, we got specularity, we got roughness, and now we have emissive. So I know that's getting looks kind of messy with the wires and everything. So whatever you can do to try to get this to be organized a little better. So I'm just going to push this down. We've got metallic, and then specular, then we got roughness, and we got emissive. So something else that we can do with these wires that we have is if you want to add some additional controls to these wires, you can double click on them, and that'll add like this kind of knot that's on here, and you can manipulate those and move those around. And so we got one for specular, and maybe I want to drag this around. Now sometimes these lines don't line up, so you can select this and hold down Control and select this one, right click and say alignment, and you can say straighten connections. There's also ways in there to align these to kind of look a little bit nicer and a little better. So again, I'll double click on this to give myself a control for that. And if you want another one on this one, you can do that. So maybe that helps just make things look a little more clear. Again, you can do this on this part as well. So if we want this to raise up, and again, I can right click on there and say alignment, straighten connections. Actually, I need to do that to that. There we go. Okay. And let's do a knot here for this one. And I'll do one here for this. And maybe I need to add 2 of them. I think that's working fairly well. So again, we can do this work to try to make it look a little bit more organized and get things laid out like that. So let's go ahead and let's just save this. Okay. And we should have everything that we need to make a material instance and start tuning this. So if you remember, if we went to this materials examples, to make a material instance, it's really simple. You just take the parent material, you right click on it, and you say create material instance. It's going to give it the same exact name, and then put an instance at the end of it. So I've got this as a master material. So I'm just going to get rid of master. I'll just do material example instance, and maybe I call this underscore version 1, like that. Okay, and so we can assign this to some of our different bricks that we have. And let's see if I change this one on here. I know that's not looking like much of a difference. So let's do a few here like this. Okay. What I like to do is be able to see what's going on in the world, and then double click on that material instance like this, and then you can see here, if we can pull this window down a little bit, we should have controls over here for everything that we set up. Now, if you remember, we made a group called base color. It grouped those things, this base color, this texture node. It grouped this within here. It grouped our desaturation fraction for our base color there. We've got metallic. We've got access to metallic, roughness, specularity values. We also have our base color darken and lighten, and our emissive color. So here's what I would like, and this is pretty nice about this setup. If I want to reorganize this stuff, I can always go back to the parent material, and let's say I wanted these to show up in that group. I can go click base color lighten and go to the group, and then I can go put that on base color, and I'll do this one, I'll put that in the base color, just save it, and then I can hop back on over to this, and it will automatically put it in the right spot for us. So now we've got the ability to change our roughness value, and you can see that we can do this stuff on the fly here. So this is the other benefit of once you get this all set up, you can tune this stuff and see it directly within the viewport, and you can figure out, okay, this is the settings that I want. So I'm going to push specular all the way up to 1, and then now the roughness, I can dial that in to where I want it to have just enough sheen on there. Now I didn't do anything with metallic, but we could put metallic up if we wanted to, but I'm just gonna leave this back. So if you change any of the values from what the default was, it'll put this little arrow, and if you click on it, it'll put it back down to whatever the default was for that. So that can come in pretty handy too. So I'm even over cranking this, but we've got a mask on there, so it's kind of could work for us. If we want to kill all the color information a little bit, we've got that desaturation node on there. If we wanted to lighten it a little bit, we could do that as well. So maybe I push it towards a bright green or something like that, and we can lighten it, and then also add some saturation to that. I know this would be kind of weird to lighten it, but then we can actually. I got those backwards. Okay, so to darken it, I was actually multiplying it by that. But if I want to lighten the thing, then I can just use the lighten within through here, and then push this up like that. And it's those two things will work together. It's kind of not the best combination or whatever. So I'll just go ahead and pull that back down through here. So it just depends on what the effects that you're going for that. The other thing is we can take a look at emissive, and maybe I put some kind of color on there like that. I think what I would like is this. You can see if we put emissive on there, we fed that black and white map into that area, but it'd be nice if we could control that a little bit and maybe make the darker areas even darker and just crank that mask a little bit. So let me show you this as a control on here. So we've got our emissive controls, and what we can do is right click and say cheap contrast like this, and we can plug this into here. Oops, let's see if I can move this thing like that. I'll get rid of that. I need to plug this out of that into there, and we need to give ourselves the ability to control that. So let's right click on here and say promote to parameter, and let's just call this emiss contrast. Like that. Okay, now we got some controls for that. I can just click and drag this under here, and if you want, we can take this box and we can drag it here a little bit like that and expand it, and once we've got everything within there, we can move this around. Now if you want that not to move around with it, you can encase that, and you can see it starts to well, it should move this thing around. Let's get this a little bit closer here like that, and now it should move around. It's funny, it actually moved under there. Not what I was looking for, but here we go. Okay, now it's starting to move around. Okay, now we'll position this. Go ahead and save this. And you can see, I know it takes a little bit of time to set up these parameters and things, but when it comes to tuning your materials and stuff, if you do it in this area, you can see how long it took for us to save that thing. You got to think that you got to be making these little micro changes, and you got to keep saving, and it just adds up a whole lot of time on you at that point. And then now that we put that control within there, we've got this emiss contrast, right? And if we wanted to make this maybe a little bit easier for us to find these controls for emissive, we would need to make a new group and call this emiss, like this. And then I can take this one and I can put that on emiss, save that. And then now we've got this emissive area for the emissive amount, and then this contrast. So see how now it's starting to pick out like just the little flower things that are on there, and then I can make that emissive, and we can overcrank and overdrive emissive. So if I put that on like a value of 20, then you can see how bright that's becoming. And if we go, let's just be crazy and try 2000, and we get like super glow bits and everything. So maybe you want a cool effect like that, you know. And let's take the emissive contrast and we can pump that up, and you can see now we've got a nice kind of cool effect going on there. Maybe that's a bit too much, and let's try 50. Do like this. So again, imagine we were just tuning those values like what we just did, and we're doing it in the parent material. Every time we do that, to see the changes update within the viewport, we would have to save that out. So again, I know it's a little bit of work to get this whole thing set up, but once you've got it set up, you've got some really nice controls for you. The other thing that we can do is, because we parameterize, so let's see what happens if we take one of our other textures. I'll just take the water texture, and you can see I can just plug it into this area here, and it will completely change the look, obviously based off the texture that we have. And I have a whole lot of greens on here, but if this is supposed to be you know, the water, then let's see if I take this contrast thing, kind of isolating the top of that a little bit like that. Let's do 0.1, maybe 0.15, somewhere there. Okay, and then this darken color, I can make this more of like a blue, like that. And if I wanted to actually lighten it by that, we could do that, and then just pull this down just a little bit. So again, we've got our different controls kind of set up within through here. We got the ability to change out our base color texture map that's kind of driving everything. We've got a desaturation thing going on for the base color. We can set up some emissive stuff and then change these the default kind of global values. All right, so the next thing we'll do is add the ability to move this thing up and down within the material. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can create this water effect of it moving up and down within the material. So what we're going to be using is the world position offset nodes, and I've already preset this up, and this is what we're going to be creating for this. Okay, so I think you're starting to understand how to get these different nodes. I'll walk you through this and exactly what's happening in here. So we're going to use a time node, so we can just right click and say time like this, and we get a time node like that. And then we're going to use a multiply, because we don't have really a control for how to increase or decrease the time, and we can't parameterize that. So what we can do is take time, which is consistent, and we'll multiply it. So if you hold down M, we can multiply it, and then we can convert this to a parameter. So let's right click on this and say promote to parameter, and you can give it a name, and you can see that I called this, what I called it was time mult, and I'll just do version 2 for this on this. The other thing is I wanted to keep everything organized, so if I go in here and go to group, there's already a world position offset that I made, but I can call this world position offset version 2, like that. So we're making this group. So this feeds everything into there, and this will give us time. It'll give us the ability to increase or decrease time. And then to do the up and down wave type motion, we need a sine node. So let's just right click in here and type in sine like this, and we can plug this in right here to the sine. And if I right click on here and say connect to world position offset, we can start to see what's going to happen with this, which there won't be any motion at all, because when we promoted this time variable, it gave a default value of 0. So let's just make this 1, and then now you can start to see the motion on there. Now if we wanted this to slow down, we could do something like 0.2, and you can see it's going to go a whole lot slower. And if we did something like 5, it's going to go a whole lot faster. So that's how we've got some kind of control over the amount of time. Now you can see the up and down motion is in X, Y, and Z, so that's why it's pushing over this way and coming back down here at a diagonal. We're going to separate that out and then treat this as a Z axis motion in the up and down, and we'll do that with this append node setup. But before we do that, we want to give ourselves some control for how far up and down that we make this go. So what we can do now is just hold down M and then click for multiply, and then we can promote this to a parameter, and let's just call this wave height version 2 like this, and I'll put it in that group of world position offset version 2. And then if we right click and then connect to world position offset, you should see now we have no motion again, because that default value is 0. But if we put this back to 1, we should get the same behavior that we had before. If we put this at like 10, it's going to go up and down quite a bit. Now if your object is flickering like in and out of visibility, I'm going to show you how to fix that in a little bit with increasing the visual bounds of the object. So just know that we'll fix that a little bit later if that's happening to you. So I'll put this default value back to 1. We've got this, and now what we're going to do is start to separate things out. So we've got currently, again, we've got motion happening in X, Y, and Z. So we've got 3 different values on here, and we're going to separate that out into one. So if we right click and say component like this and get a component mask, we can mask out 2 other channels, the green and the blue, and just leave red, and that will give us just 1 value. Okay, so in order for us to make this go just up and down, we need a 0 value in X and we need a 0 value in Y, and we can take 2 values and we can append them together to make those like act as if it's a group together, like U and V coordinates or something like that. So right click and say append, and if we put this into, this is actually going to go down to a different one, so we need to right click and say promote to parameter, and I'll call this X version 2, which is going to make a 0 value, and right click on here and say promote to parameter, and we'll call this Y version 2 like this. So now we've got these 2 values that are being appended together, and then we can piggyback off of this and then put it into another append node. And then we can take this and plug it right into here. I'm going to double click and add a knot, and so I can pull that over here and make it look like this. So now we've got a 0 for X, a 0 for Y, and then this is going to become our Z value that you see here. I'm just going to hold down Control, select this, right click, and say alignment, straighten up connections like that. Okay. Now if we plug this in, right click and say connect to world position offset, we should just get an up and down motion in this area, right? If we change the wave height like we talked about, we can make it go up and down quite a bit, pretty far, right? Put that back down to 1. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to add a way to turn this on and off. And so if we right click on here and if we type in switch, there should be a static switch parameter, and we can give this a name. And so I call this wave on off version 2, like this. And if it's on, it should give us all this motion that we have. Okay, I'm going to right click, plug this in, connect to a world position offset. It's going to give us an error because it wants something for false. We can't right click on there and promote to parameter on there, but what we can do is just hold down 1 and then click, and that'll give us a scalar, a constant, and we can plug that into the false. So we got a value of 0 for false. So now if you take a look at this node, basically what's going to happen is we have this default value of false. If we turn it on true, this can be the default value, but if we're setting up a parent material, we probably don't want this effect to be on for most of our materials. It's going to be kind of a special case for our water. So let's leave it to false, and then whenever we turn this on true for the material instance, we'll have access to everything on here for that. And in the group, I'm going to put this on world position offset version 2, like that. And the last thing that I did for this was just to keep everything nice and clean, was just put a comment box around everything. And just do this, select everything, tap C, world position offset, controls version 2, like that. Okay, so that should give us everything that we need for this. If we take a look at that material instance, let's double click on it, and I'm going to take everything from this world position offset version 2 and turn it on. So I had to save my material real quick for this to show up. But you remember we had that parameter that would turn on or off the controls for that, right? So if we enable that, watch what happens whenever we turn that from false. From when it's on false, you don't see anything that sat in front of it. But if we turn that to true, then now we've got access to the time multiply and then the height. So now we can do something like this within here. And then we can change the time, say that's just way too fast. We can put that on 0.1, something like that. And so now we have this thing working. So the last thing I want to show you is under the meshes, if you've got this thing and it's flickering and it's basically turning on and off the visibility, it's because objects in Unreal have a bounding box around them to tell them whether or not they should draw, and if it's not within the view of the camera, it turns off the visibility of things so it doesn't have to draw. That saves on performance. But what's happening is in the material we're pushing this thing outside of the bounds, and so it doesn't sit within those bounds correctly anymore, and it thinks maybe this thing shouldn't be drawing to the camera. So in order to fix that, we can take our mesh, let's double click it and go to the static mesh viewer area, and you can go to show and you can show bounds. Now I've already increased this on this mesh, so I wouldn't be having that problem, but you can go into the search area and type in bounds. Let's type this correctly. So let's type in bounds, and you can see I've increased the positive and negative bounds to 20 by 20 by 20 across all this, and you can see how it basically grows this thing out. So if I needed it to go really high, I'm not going to do 500, let's do 50, tab 50. But you can see how it's growing out those bounds that you see there, okay? So I'm just going to put this back to 20 within there, and then just go ahead and save that. So if you're getting any kind of weird flickering with your object turning on and off, take a look at that. Now, because of Lumen, it does have this weird kind of ghosting effect on this. When you're not using Lumen, I didn't notice that kind of thing. So that's a new kind of artifact when using Lumen, and hopefully in the future that will be something that's fixed, but I have a feeling that has something to do with the performance and how Lumen kind of works currently in its current state. Okay, so now that we know this material setup that we've got here. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this, and I will right click and say connect to world position offset, save that. And I've got everything that I need for a master material, and you should have a pretty good understanding of how to give yourself some kind of controls on this to set up a good parent material, and then be able to make a material instance and be able to tune those things. Again, I know it's a little bit of work to get this all set up and have it organized, but in a team dynamic, it's going to be really important to have really clean materials. And then once you have parent materials and material instances, it doesn't matter if you're doing individual projects or team projects, you're really going to need this set up to be able to tune these values and be able to tune them in a way that is basically real time, because otherwise you have to keep saving this thing and checking it, and it just takes way too much time. Okay, and so the next and last thing that we'll take a look at is these two different transparency modes within inside of Unreal that will do opacity mask and full translucency. So we either have on and off transparency, or we will have transparency that has gradation within it.